So welcome back to CSC235 ACS Technology Virtual Lab. I hope you enjoyed your extended holiday weekend over Labor Day. And essentially what we're going to do today is to work very quickly to review and summarize our module content so that by the end of this week, you'll be ready to engage your first attempt to the Module 1 assessment. So do understand, some of you have been sent reminders to complete assignments, and the solution in particular, there are going to be some assessment items that pull from those assignments and solutions. So you'll need to be sure that you complete these activities promptly. I know that there are deadlines that have already passed as stated, but you can still go ahead and submit late. So you don't have a problem uploading these things. And if you do, just give me a shout and we'll change the setting so we can do that. In particular, what we'd like to do is go ahead and get started with our study guide. And I do want to call out in the textbook, so the reading for this module is chapters 1 through 3, but that's just 30 pages, pages 1 through 31, okay? And it's light reading. This is basically a paperback book, and I just wanted to show you it's not the kind of stuff that's going to take a lot of time to cover. If we get into chapter 1 and we go ahead and progress, there's a lot of interesting information that I do not have the time to explicitly state in the study guide. So the study guide you have to memorize. It's in the references folder. Anything in the references folder you have to memorize. In our resources folder, you will find the recordings to our session, right? So session recordings, that's from our first class and our second class last week. And now at the end of today, you'll see 7 September, right? So essentially, if you're in here and you see anything in the references folder, this is stuff that you want to explicitly cover. But in addition to that, there are some finer points in the textbook, and it's really important to understand that the textbook is required here. I don't want this, so I'm not interested in flashcards. So if you are grappling with how to increase the size of your viewing or whatever, you can adjust in Kindle, or of course if you have hard copies. So I think what we can do is increase the font size, right? Decrease the font size. Makes it easier to read depending on what you're doing. It explains virtualization, and it's important to understand that when we explain virtualization here and in the study guide, it's important to read this in your textbook because they're coming at it from a different place, okay? So what you're going to do is get different facets of what virtualization is and how it works, and that's really important. So there are other virtualization platforms or virtualization applications. In particular, you may have heard of VMware or Parallels if you run a Mac, or Hyper-V if you're working with server operating systems in Windows, or the professional edition of Windows. But in any case, one of the things that we do is we take advantage of the way the operating system virtualizes hardware components. In your, I believe we did already show, if it says this computer on your system, and you right-click this and you go to manage, what you'll find is that the hardware on your device or your system is not accessed directly by software, okay? So let's just get that out of the way. your devices and components are used as a model or template to create a virtual version of a device, a generic version of the device, like a generic display adapter, right? A generic disk drive, a generic network card. And that's what the operating system does. It creates virtual components of your hardware components. Well, it wasn't long before computer scientists realized that, hey, what if we were to take this same idea and build virtual components in memory, right, that would load? We'll just, I mean, because we have so much hardware, right, we have so much memory, so much hard disk space, we can actually create computers within computers, more than one of them, right? So the idea of a virtual machine has been around a very long time. In fact, another word or name for operating system is quite literally the virtual machine, okay? And this is something we cover in greater depth in the other operating system courses. But one thing I want you to do is to take a moment to get into the computer management console and then open up Device Manager. And what you can see is how these devices are created generically and then it's loaded into memory. So here's the memory address range for a virtual Ethernet card. Now, when I create virtual machines on my system, I can utilize that virtual component to present a network interface in an Ubuntu virtual machine, Windows Server virtual machine. If I have multiple virtual machines, they can all sort of access and interface with the one physical one. So this is just something to keep in mind as you read the information here, because there's great additional information. Among the things that you want to be sure you, let's make sure we update. Let me update the roster here real quick. So one of the things that I really appreciate about the author is that they explain the difference between hypervisor types. Now, what is a hypervisor? A hypervisor is the component that operates or translates the physical hardware into virtual machines. So it's an application in one sense, and you'll see that in just a minute, but it can also work like an operating system. In other words, there's a virtual environment that exists where you don't have Windows, you don't have the Mac OS X, you don't have an operating system or firmware. When you load a type 1 hypervisor, it's the first thing that loads when you boot the computer, and you don't get an operating screen. You don't get an operating system screen to log into. It doesn't exist. It loads the hypervisor, and then it does away with the operating system because it says, you know what, I'm not going to spend time running Windows. That's too resource intensive. I'm just going to load the platform that I need for the virtual machines. That's a type 1. Think of it as a direct flight to a destination in virtual terms. So between the physical host and the guest virtual machines, the terminology is really important. So if we're pointing at these little things here, each of those are virtual machines, right? So you could have a half a dozen virtual systems. You could have a half a dozen computers running inside your one physical computer. I don't know if you knew this, but it's true, okay? And that's one of the cool things about this. It's the hypervisor that sits between the guest machines or guest systems and the host system. The host system is the actual physical system. Any questions about what we're talking about here? Now, the coolest part is you can take this to an extreme. So in a data center where you have these huge servers, you can basically put that virtual layer, the hypervisor, right? The virtualization layer can sit across and between systems. So what you see here in this image, no, I can't. I was gonna try to zoom in. Where's my zoom? Nope, F11. It's not it. I want this to get bigger. There we go. Well, it doesn't really help. It just sort of makes things. All right, never mind that. This is a server. I know this this sliver right here, that's actually the kind of server that you would put in a data center. It fits on a rack. And they're often called pizza box servers. So they're the height of a pizza box. And there are 3 of them there. So you'd stack them on top of each other, or you might have them next to each other on a rack. And the virtualization layer can be on the top of that across all 3. And it's the storage, the memory, the disk, all that feeds into the hardware part of this. But once you get to this layer, you can just have virtual machine, virtual machine, virtual machine, virtual machine, virtual machine. You can have 27 virtual systems. And the cool part is that if one of these servers has to reboot because there are updates, if it drops, all of these virtual machines keep going because the other 2 servers are still operating. They just run a little slower. Does that make sense? And this is the stuff that your textbook explains in greater detail, right? So one of the things that you got to keep an eye on is your shared resource. Everybody repeat with me. You cannot give what you do not have. Go ahead and unmute your microphone and say, or if you're in the room, just speak out. You cannot give what you do not have. Now, I know that seems kind of second grade, but by asking you to do that physically, maybe it'll stick, because you're going to see that again when you get to the assessment, right? You're going to see that again when you get to the assessment. Any questions at this point? Or does anybody have any observations or comments based on what we've shared so far? Okay, so remember what we're doing here is we're walking down through our student learning objectives as we walk through these screens, for those of you that just joined us, right? So moving right along, you can have a system that's running Windows or a Mac or Linux, and then you can have VirtualBox, and then you can have virtual machine, virtual machine, virtual machine. Now, because you have the operating systems here, this is a type 2 hypervisor. In fact, we're going to talk about this. Your textbook spends some time explaining why you would want to virtualize anything. Why do you want to create virtual systems? It gets down to money and stability. In simple terms, you can have 5 servers for the cost of 1. Let me say that again. You can run 5 servers for what it would cost you to run 1 physical server. It used to be that when people needed 5 servers, they would buy 5 physical servers. But you don't have to do that anymore. So instead of spending $20,000 for each of 5 servers and spending $100,000, you can just buy one $20,000 server and then run 5 virtual servers on the 1 server, and you save $80,000. That's a pretty good trick. That's like eating 10 pounds of restaurant food and only gaining 2 pounds the next morning. In any case, and spending 1/5 of the money on that, right? Now, the other thing that's really cool about this is computer management. So I mentioned before that if you have a virtual machine, you can turn on a feature that is called snapshots. And you can kind of record what's happening on the machine as it's happening. And then if something bad happens, you can basically go back in time and restore it to what it was an hour ago, a day ago, a week ago. So in terms of computer management, it's much easier to fix a computer, because if you blow it up today, you're like, oh, that's bad. Now I'm screwed. No, you aren't. If you're running with a virtual machine, you just roll it back to yesterday. And now it's working. So quit hurting yourself. Now, I was tortured when my kids were growing up. I was afflicted by having to watch many, many, many Disney movies. I don't know if you're a Disney fan. I don't know if that's the kind of thing that's your groove, but one of my favorites is Tarzan. And there's this scene where Tantor, the elephant, is trying to make a point with his friend, and he's like, he's got, maybe it's not Tantor, but it's one of the gorillas that has an arm, and he keeps smacking somebody in the face. He's like, quit hurting yourself, quit hurting yourself, quit hurting yourself, right? I want you to imagine that this is one way that you can operate. After you take this course, you can decide, you know what, I'm going to build what I need to use for the university as a virtual machine. And then I'm going to keep a copy of that every now and then, and I'm going to turn on the feature so I can back it up in time. And then when my cousin comes over and gets on my screen to borrow my screen because my cousin needs something off the internet and it blows up, I can cuss out my cousin, but then I can just roll it back, poof, and it's like magic. So what's the moral of the story? You can quit hurting yourself, quit hurting yourself, quit hurting yourself if you really catch what this is about. And it's huge. That's the experimentation piece. So in your book, it says, oh, you can try stuff. Have you ever gone on the internet and you're like, oh, I think I want to try this software, and then you really regret it? Because now everything's slow and it's weird, and you want to go back and you want to install it, but it doesn't go back. You can experiment. That's another advantage of virtualization. Hardware management, right? You get more out of your hardware. We've already talked about that. That helps you save money. Backups. If you can just roll things back in time, backups are easier in a sense. So those are some of the advantages of virtualization. Are there any questions about this? When you install VirtualBox, you go to the virtualbox.org website. You've already encountered much of this for your assignments and your solution, right? So we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. System requirements, installation process. You basically just say, oh yeah, accept the defaults. It's going to make your network interface. It's going to build a new network interface. So now you have an extra network interface on your system. What am I saying? If you go into your network interface after you load VirtualBox, and you go here, and then you go inside your adapter settings, you're going to find out that you had an actual Ethernet interface, but now you have, oh my gosh, a VirtualBox network interface. So I have a separate Ethernet connection, and it's used for all of my virtual boxes. In this case, I also have Hyper-V turned on in Windows. So I have a second virtual interface, okay? And this is normal. It's going to fuss and say, hey, there might be a slight disruption. So after you install, it's the extension pack. Now, the important thing to understand about the extension pack is that it's on the VirtualBox side of things, and you have to load this. But then once you get inside, listen, this is really important. Once you get inside the virtual machine, you have to insert the guest editions disk. It's a two-step process. So the extension pack makes your hardware play nice with the virtual machine. But in order for that to work, after you load the extension pack, that's only one step of the process. When you start your virtual machine, you have to go to a menu option and insert the guest edition disk. That's the virtual side of this extension pack, and it loads into your virtual machine. So there's a host side on your physical hardware. That's the extension pack piece. But then inside the virtual machine, there's the guest editions disk. You have to do both. Everybody get what I'm saying? A lot of times people try virtual machines and like, It's slow, it doesn't work right. That's because you missed a step. You missed a step, and it's bad. Quit hurting yourself. Quit hurting yourself. Quit hurting yourself. Oh, okay, enough said. The VirtualBox interface, okay? So when you get inside here, what you're gonna find is that the version we're using now is a little different than the textbook. It talks about menu items and some of that stuff is in a different place. I just wanna warn you about that. And one of the things I wanna show about this is that there are preferences you can set in VirtualBox where you tell VirtualBox, I don't want you to put a virtual machine in my cloud documents. Because if I put my virtual machine in my cloud documents, my internet is going to slow down. And then I'm going to choke the internet for everyone in my home. And they're going to be pissed off, and I'm going to be pissed off, and nothing's going to work right because I didn't set my preferences to put my virtual machines in a directory that I build called temp or VM or something like that, right? So you want to find a home for your virtual machine and you want it to be on your physical hard disk. That's an important thing. But you can also import appliances. We do that in another class, CSC239, Scientific Computing Applications. We actually download an appliance. So sometimes when you take a virtual machine and you want to share the wealth with everyone, and you've gone to all this trouble to build a virtual machine that's special, and it has all these extra features, and you've loaded all this really cool software, and it just works so much better because it's updated and it's no bugs. Everything is smooth and fast and hot. And you're like, now I want to share this with the world. What you do is you create an appliance with it. That's like cloning. It's like cloning. And you take that clone, which is called an appliance, and then you give it to others, and then when they install it, they don't have to do all the extra hoops to set up their virtual machine. You already did it for them. So they get to do the same thing, see the same thing, work the same screens, click and enter the same commands. Everything's the same. It's a clone. Literally, that's what appliance is, okay? Any questions about appliances? I know we're moving kind of fast here. We are trying to cover so much today. Yeah, let's get into, all right, so there's extra features where you can get into the logs. So when you're in VirtualBox, let's open up VirtualBox, because it would be nice to refer to VirtualBox like you're seeing it on your screen. Can everybody see this? Yeah. Okay. So here's the Debian that you're going to load for your solution, right? And if you notice these little bullets, these three menu items, little bullets there, boom, 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 in order. If you click it, this is where you can do the timeline thing where you can roll back the time. It's called snapshots. And we'll explore that in the next module. This is where you look at logs if you're trying to troubleshoot because it starts to run and it just doesn't run. And you want to know why, what's the error. You can find extra information in logs. This shows you the kind of activity that your VirtualBox is having. So if it's slowing down your whole system, you can kind of see, okay, what is it that's going bonkers here? It's really cool. And then there's a file manager where you can basically take a thumb drive, put it in your physical machine, and then decide, hey, with my file manager, I want to put this file inside all my other virtual machines. So that's what you do with file manager. It lets you open up file manager in your virtual machines so you can just kind of drag and drop, if that makes sense. Okay. Now you can also drag and drop and copy and paste inside virtual machines, but sometimes that's not a good idea. It's better to use the file manager. If you're using your virtual machines for like, I don't know, hacking something and you're running a Kali virtual machine because you're a badass and you just want to get out there and really do, this is an undergraduate institution at a university and we are adults here, right? I won't slip like that very often. But just to see if you're awake, I just wanted to see if there were some expressions on, I just wanted to see if somebody was really listening, right? Okay, and it's good that you were, okay. So for those of you that are joining us virtually, there were some students in the room, and I made that comment and, you know, there was a physical response there. If you're a real hacker, and you're using Kali and you're getting on the dark web with your virtual machine, because I don't know, you can blow up a virtual machine when you're out on the dark web, and you don't have to blow up your system when you're on the dark web. All right, do you understand what I'm getting at here? You can do things on the dark web with a virtual machine, and if the virtual machine goes boom, it's not a problem. Well, if you turn on the actual, if you enable the actual features that are default, where it's like, oh yeah, I want to be able to copy and paste, I want to be able to drag and drop stuff. That opens up all kinds of channels between your virtual machine and your real machine. Do you think it's a good idea, if you're hacking the dark web with a Kali virtual machine, to accept the defaults? Short answer is, and I'm borrowing from Medea and all of her movies, hell no, right? You don't want to have all of those defaults in place. You want to intentionally drag and drop using File Manager instead of leaving the defaults enabled. Just providing some quick tips and tricks for those of you that are trying to get your virtual machine to run and it just won't run. And maybe there's like a screen door in a submarine between your physical machine and your virtual machine. I don't know, am I talking too fast here? I'm just, it's 2:38 and we have to cover a lot yet. Are we good? Does anyone have any comments or observations based on the material we've shared so far? Do we have everybody on our, yeah, we do, okay. Moving right along. Machine. When you close the machine, if it's running, one of the things that you do, if you close the window, it'll say, do you want to power it off or shut it down gracefully? You want to choose the shut it down gracefully. If you say power it off, that's the same as jerking the power cord out of the wall. That's when it's unresponsive, okay? Let's keep going. In our textbook, okay, so there is built-in help, and it can be some helpful. And there's a lot of armchair experts out on YouTube, so you can find YouTube videos that show you how to do all sorts of stuff. And if it's an older version of VirtualBox, or you have a different platform, it may work, it may not. Okay, just telling you. Now, the virtual machine. When we talk about the hypervisor, let's open this up now. So one of the cool things about our student learning objectives is that they're all lettered, and basically the sections are highlighted with letters. So you can just kind of jump down to the letter, and right here it talks about actual physical computers. We've been over this before, haven't we? When we talked about how a bit is a 1 or a 0 and bits is a shorter term of binary digits, right? Did we cover that? Yes, no, maybe? First time around? Second session, maybe? Okay, these are zones. Zone, zone, and zone. Okay, that's what they mean by zones. So talking about those. We did talk about the workshop, didn't we? Did we mention the workshop analogy? Yes, no, maybe?
I don't remember.
Okay, if you don't remember, then we need to talk about this for a minute. I want you to pretend that your physical hardware, your actual laptop or PC, is like a workshop, a craftsman's workshop. Are you with me? Let's say that you're a carpenter or a potter, and it's a workshop. And the CPU is actually you. So the craftsman that's doing all the process, that's working the computations and getting the work done, that's you. You're the craftsman, that's the CPU. The RAM, or random access memory, the system memory, zone 1, that's like the work table or workbench. The more work table and workbench you have, and I want you to think in your mind's eye, I'm in a workshop. Do I want just one teeny tiny little table, like just this big over here, okay, I have a workshop and here's my workbench and it's only this big, right? So it's only the half of the table. What would you have to do if you had a lot of materials and a lot of tools to work with? Wouldn't you have to like swap out? You'd have to like, okay, I ran out of space here. So now I got to move the tools off of here and get the next tool. I got to get this material off of here and get the next batch of material. You'd have to do a lot of switching, right? So remember that RAM or system memory, volatile memory, temporary memory, it stores data and instructions. And the more of that you have, the more efficient you're going to work. It's like having more of a workbench. Now, what happens if you have a small workbench? You have to go to the shelves and the bins to keep putting stuff on and off, right? The shelves and the bins are the hard disk. Does that make sense? So if you have to keep going to the shelf, it's like, oh, now I need this tool. I got to take this. I don't have any room here. I got to take this tool off. I got to take that tool off. I got to move this material. I'm doing that. That's what a hard disk has to work harder that way. So if you're pulling from shelves and bins to swap out stuff because your workspace is real small, you're burning up your hard drive. The less RAM you have, the shorter the life of your hard drive. Don't know if we ever explained that, but that's pretty cool stuff. Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay, so we said that one of the reasons why, did I talk about the car and how if computers were cars? I didn't? Okay, so there's this pioneer in the computing industry by the name of Moore. And he came up with Moore's law. And it basically says every 18 months to 2 years, the power of a CPU, a processor, doubles every 18 months to 2 years. Just doubles. And so what's happened is that in the last 50 years, we've doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled the performance of our hardware. So if computers were like cars, you could now buy a Lamborghini Veneno. It's like I'll never own one. I'd have to sell everything I have and I'd still only have half of one. It's like $1 million sports car. But if computers were like automobiles, I could buy a Lamborghini Veneno for 25 cents and it would travel 1 million miles using a single gallon of fuel. Oh, and it would go from 0 to 60 in 1/10 of a second. Okay, everybody get the picture? Okay, so because computer hardware has gotten so good, here's the hypervisor. We were talking about this before. Everyone needs to look at this screen right now. Is it showing on there or did this thing time out? Oh, you're looking on your screens, but you don't see the big screen, do you? You gotta let me know when that happens, okay? Is it showing now?
Not yet.
It's almost there. Okay, it's loading on the big screen. All right, we can still look at our screens though. If you have a type 1 hypervisor, that means that the virtual environment you've loaded onto your system replaces the operating system. It sits right on top of the hardware and it replaces the operating system. You don't have a Windows screen to log into, okay? No Mac login, none of that. A type 2 hypervisor is a hosted environment. That means that the hypervisor is like another application. You could have a browser open and have your hypervisor open. This is what VMware VirtualBox is, okay? So there are certain types of virtual programs that take over all the hardware because they're running on a server in a data center and you have to run 200 servers on one piece of hardware. So there's no room to spare for an operating system. No GUIs, no file explorer, no cute little applications you can use, and none of that. It's just hardware and the virtual resources, right? So this is industrial strength right here, type 1. This is like business grade, Fortune 500 grade, think Amazon, right? And this is type 2, right? So We already said you cannot give what you do not have. If you have a CPU with 4 cores, you can't configure a virtual machine with 8 cores, right? If your physical machine only has a gig of what, 500 gigs of disk space, can you configure and build a terabyte drive for your virtual machine? No, cannot give what you do not have. Okay, so yeah, we talked about the benefits. We explained the interface. Okay, so these are important tips and tricks. This is where you need to spend some quality time. The last page of the study guide. I would say that probably a quarter to a third of your assessment questions will draw right from this bullet list right here. The tips and tricks. These are the, hey, I've been doing this for 25 years and it's not in the book kind of thing. Okay? So you might see some of this, and then again, you might not. Like right here, for instance. To run your host faster and VM faster, close the extra tabs in your what? Your browsers. So I'm going to hit the skinny button here. That's this little sliver of a button down here in the system tray. And you can go into the system tray, and if you have like 47 little blinkies down here, you got a lot of extra software that just loads automatically, and you may not use it all. It's like, do I really need my graphics tool for my graphics controller because I have a gaming laptop and I'm running games all the time and I have to adjust the graphics so, you know, the boss looks really bad and I have a lot of fun? Well, maybe I don't do that very often, but it's loading all the time, so it's taking up resources. The other thing that happens too, and I see this over and over and over again, it never fails. And I'm just being a little melodramatic here. A student will say, hey, I tried to do that virtual thing and set up the virtual thing, and I just, it's so slow, it's not working. They didn't set up the preferences to go into a temp folder in the C drive where there is a VM folder to put your VM machines, your virtual machines, and the VHD folders where the virtual hard disks go, right? You need to set up your preferences that way. If you don't, it's going to go into documents. And if you're one of those people that subscribe to Office 365 because, I don't know, they give away Office 365 free at the university and you load it on all your devices, it's gonna put everything in the cloud. Your documents are in the cloud. Do any of you notice that when you're saving your stuff, it's not on your local disk, it's in the cloud? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? You ever seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, wouldn't it suck if you put a 60 gigabyte virtual machine, not byte, in the cloud because the defaults were in place? That's a big deal, right? And that's one of the tips and tricks. The other thing is, if you have, we talked about that before, so now I've mentioned it twice. I'm probably going to mention it a third, a fourth, a fifth, sixth time before we get to Halloween. Why? Because it keeps coming up over and over and over again. Here's the other thing. If you're one of those squirrely people that just like to open a new browser tab, the thing that I want you to understand is, and watch this. Let's say I go to the menu and I'm going to do this. So I'm going to open up registrar, and I want to go to course schedule. Come on, open up a new tab for me, please. There we go. There's a new tab. You with me? What happens is that we collect tabs, but each of those tabs, if you grab the tab and you pull it down, that's actually a whole browser instance. What am I saying? If you have 47 tabs in your browser, you have 47 browsers open. Let me say that again. If you have 47 tabs on your browser, whatever is running on each of those tabs, that's a separate browser. You're opening, and you have open 47 browsers. What's that going to do to your RAM? What's that going to do to your disk? What's that going to do to your system? If you go here and you look at Task Manager and you go to Performance, this is why we had you optimize your personal technology, by the way. But if you do this and then you find out, oh my gosh, my CPU, it's 60%. Oh my gosh, my memory is 78%, and you're not really doing anything. What do you have open? a browser. Did you know that like 2/3 of your memory is in that browser, right? Close the tabs. The other thing that happens too is, and I don't know if you knew this, but if you're in like multiple classes and you're in Blackboard and you have multiple Blackboard tabs open and you're logged in with a password on all those tabs and you never close those tabs, but you logged in with a password, and then tomorrow you have to change your password. Are you following? So now you have a new password in Blackboard, but you go back to the previous tab for the other class, and how are you logged in? With the old password? You know what your browser does? Sometimes it tries to use what's in cache, what's in memory, what you did when you started that other browser tab. Translation, if you have 3 different instances of Blackboard and the old password is in play and you change your password and those things are banging away, have you ever noticed how your password can be disabled? Your password can be blown, your login is disabled, and you don't know what the heck you did. Has anyone ever experienced that here on this campus? No, I have. I've experienced that because I have multiple browsers. I have Firefox open, I have Edge open, I have Chrome open, and each of those have 5 or 6 tabs. It's happened to me. And I'm a certified systems engineer with Microsoft. My screen shouldn't blow up, but it does, and that's what's going on. So, in any case, do spend, please, some quality time in your last page of the study guide and memorize all of that, okay? And this is where we stop for the day. Oh, this one right here, this is really cool. So if you're at home, you have a router. And your router takes the public network and it turns it into a local internal network. And then everybody has an address that goes something like 192.168.1. such and such, right? If you've been in network courses or you've been in cyber courses with me before, you've seen this. You go home and you look at IP config, or you look at your, and it's like, oh, I'm at 192.168. something. Okay. Now, when you set up a virtual machine, it's NATed. So that's called NATing, network address translation. I'm taking the public internet address and I'm translating it into all the different devices inside my home network. Now, when you have a virtual machine, your virtual interface, the network, says, okay, we have to translate this unless we want to be bridged. Translation. You can tweak your settings in your virtual machine so that it appears like all the other devices in your home network. That's called bridged. But if you keep the default setting for a new virtual machine is NAT. Here's what I'm talking about. This is the last thing I'll share with you and then we'll go. So inside here, if I look at my settings on my Debian and I go to settings under my network, what I see is NAT. So let's see if I get this right. At home, I'm getting a 192.168. I've already been NATed. But now I start my virtual machine and that's also NATed. So the NATing is NATed. I get weird network stuff and I can't get on the internet and I can't update my virtual machine. It's called double NATing. The same thing happens to gamers, by the way. Gamers will set up a gateway so they can do network gaming. And what they'll often get on the screen is a error that says, hey, you're double NATed. That's what they're talking about. If you want to change this, all you do is go to bridged. Bridged means now my virtual machine is like any other device it's like my Amazon Fire Stick. It's like my Google Home. It's like, you know, the wireless on my phone. My phone sees my virtual machine, my laptop sees my virtual machine. It's on the same network with my physical machine. That's bridged. Everybody got it? A lot of times you can fix a network problem just by going bridged instead of NATing because it's double NATed. Okay. All right. So we've really ground it out. We've gone into all the extra details and weeds. Please finish your solution this week. And before the week is out, I will post the Module 1 assessment. Before we start our next class, you have to complete your first attempt of the Module 1 assessment. And I'll be scoring your submissions over the, I'm gonna discard my changes. Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments? Anything to share based on the information we've shared, presented today? Going once? Going twice?